1969. And as a freshman in college, I took a course in economics. And it was the worst course I could possibly imagine. And at the end of it, I swore to myself I would never take another course in economics. It was a course in microeconomics that I now teach. Right? So I then, to reward myself for managing to get through it, loaded myself and my buddies in a van and headed south through Salvador's area, through Sonora and through Sinaloa, and to go surfing in Mazatlan. And I came back to find out that my draft lottery number was 20.
Head for Canada.
No, it was too cold. I was ready to head back. I had a place all picked out in Mexico to go. But I was faced with the dilemma that I got the last year of student deferments, but I had to have 15 credits. And so my choice really came down to another economics course or Vietnam. At which point I thought, this is what they mean by opportunity cost. And San Diego State had 38,000 students. This would be a tiny class there. But there was so much overload, they brought in an adjunct from the local community college. And I went from the worst class I ever had to the best teacher I've ever had in my entire life, from kindergarten through graduate school. His name was Will Cummings. And on the masthead of his syllabus was this quote from Mikhail Gibran. The teacher who is wise does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather lead you to the threshold of your own mind. And I have spent an entire career as a teacher trying to emulate Will and trying to avoid that microeconomics class. Like Marcy was saying, the completely unengaged teacher. Did anybody ever have a teacher who you knew was bored with the subject matter and resentful for having to teach?
Yes.
Those are the worst. So my big question becomes, what does sustainability mean? I know I founded a sustainability major, but it's like one of the most vaguely defined things that I can imagine. Like, sustaining what? And as an economist, I think we can either sustain the process of capital accumulation, make money, invest it, grow bigger, make more money, exploit more labor, remove labor with machines, make more money, put it into financial assets. We can sustain that sometimes, not always. They call those periods where you can't, recessions and depressions or long-term stagnation. But the problem is the system in overshoot can't grow its way into sustainability. So economic sustainability means grow. Environmental sustainability first means degrow, which means getting smaller, and then a steady state economy, which means staying small. So to me, the two things are pretty incompatible. So I try to engage students to think about big picture issues. Not quite as well as Marcy, but maybe you want to scare them a lot. Like, what would the world be like if there wasn't enough electricity to run your cell phone? Like, what would you do? There was a horrendous thunderstorm that came through and knocked out all the power. And after the storm passed and the sun came out, all of the adults were acting as a community. We're picking up each other's lives, we're talking to each other, and all the kids are like, what do we do? So what kind of new skills would you have to get to manage your life? Or maybe even important, what kind of old skills that have been forgotten will you have to rekindle in order to manage your life?
Unintended with the Kindle part.
Yeah, unintended. But, you know, I know that weather is a climate and you can't put together conclusions about climate from a single weather event. But at the same time, we can't avoid looking at patterns. And, you know, the patterns are there. We had just sub-zero winter temperatures. There was a 20-degree anomaly in the Arctic Ocean that steered the cold wind down here. But remember, in the Arctic, the 20-degree anomaly is still 40 below zero, and when all that channels down here, what do you mean global warming? It's so cold. But we've had the hottest year ever, and every year is the hottest year ever. And we had torrential summer rains. The beautiful lake you see was green by the end of the summer because it rained and it rained and it rained. And you'll notice that if you've driven around the area, there's a lot of farmland. In fact, there's more cows in Cayuga County than there are people. And ever since they classified concentrated animal feeding operations as point source pollution, farmers just spread the manure on their fields and all the nutrients wash into the lake, and so we get what they call harmful algal blooms. Of course, really cyanobacteria, but so there's all of these things that, you know, Puerto Rico was devastated, as was much of the Caribbean. So, you know, are these things unique, one-time event, acts of God, or are they the new normal? Or maybe the new normal is there is no normal. What does it mean, and what can you do to change it? That's my question, because, you know, Jim Kunstler, who's spoken here before, put it so well. What we're seeing is just the outer bands of a shitstorm that we are not prepared for. You know, what can we do about it? And I always, when I teach my class, try to put that emphasis on is what can we do about it? And when you put questions 1 and 2 together, what's your life going to be like? Will there be the cell phone app that says climate remediation that you can push and then lead a comfortable life? Or just kind of what? Imagine. That's what I try to get people to do in class, is to imagine. Wells is a liberal arts college. One of my favorite parts of teaching history of economic thought is my section on Malthus. And the reason I like it is I begin with a Shelley sonnet. People know that Malthus wrote his essay on population as a reply to William Godwin and the Marquis de Condorcet. And William Godwin's daughter, Mary Godwin, got married to Percy Shelley, and they went on vacation, but it was the year Mount Tambora exploded, putting so much sulfur dioxide. It was the year without summer. So they went off on holiday and it did nothing but rain. So they said, let's write a ghost story. And Mary Shelley was the only one who came through. So I read a sonnet by Percy Shelley, and then I go through Malthus, and I end by deriving a differential equation for population growth. The perfect liberal arts experience. So since you're in a liberal arts college, you get a poem. And this poem is by Drew Dellinger, and it's from Hieroglyphic Stairway. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake. because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep, my great-great-grandchildren ask me in my dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing and the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? Well, I think most of us in here know, and so what are we going to do? There was a time back when I kept my student deferment that I would be a little bit more militant. When we found out that the Naval Electronics Laboratory was producing plastic fragmentation grenades that wouldn't show up in an X-ray machine, and then we're shipping them to Camp Pendleton and then to Vietnam. There was a point when I laid down on the freeway to stop the shipments. And there was a time when I occupied the nuclear power plant in Seabrook, New Hampshire. As I've gotten a little older and probably gotten a little less militant, that jail is not such an exciting experience anymore. But what I do try to do is not only to transmit knowledge, beckon people to enter the doors of wisdom, but rather try to find ways to lead people to the threshold of their own mind, to think, how is it going to affect your life? And I once had a student tell me what I was supposed to do, make him get rich. Where I said, I don't care. My job is to get you to think of profound thoughts about things you wouldn't think about at all in my absence. And so here's what I'm doing. And what I would really like to find out is what other people are doing, because I'm not always effective. Marcy had talked about not showing up. Dana back there was the student who would always raise her hand and was one of the 6 people out of 23 who regularly showed up. So I'm not getting to everyone. So here's what I'm doing, and tell me what I might do a little bit differently, please. So here's what I see. Actually, I put this together. I'm now a 67-year-old academic, but you know, how do I convey a love of complexity in a world where people crave simplicity? And how do I transmit this need for a holistic understanding in an age of specialization? And how do I transmit this abiding love of nature when nature is absolutely frightening to me? I learned that when I was going to graduate school in New Hampshire, and friends visited from New York City, and we were walking along the road, and there was a sound in the woods, and people were fundamentally, what's that? Squirrel? Maybe a raccoon? Give me the South Bronx or Bedford-Stuyvesant at midnight any time, but this is really frightening, because nature just isn't flower gardens and ambling through the woods. Nature is hurricanes and tornadoes and drought and wildfire. I think much of the use of fossil fuels has been to remove us from nature, to give me a nice climate-controlled rooms that have no windows in them, which certainly couldn't think. This is one of the few things that has chalkboards, because I think in terms of energy use, chalk is cheap. I think it's also more effective because instead of having an event, things go up in process. And if everything is already there on the slide, there's no place for the students to add anything. And so, I too am a real believer in low tech, of course, except for public presentations. Jim Kunstler once said, You people have no idea how boring you are. Nobody wants to read a PowerPoint slide full of bullet points, so I'll get rid of this one as quick as I can. One of the problems about sustainability is often the problem is just too big to wrap your mind around and to wrap your arms around. And it also entails rethinking and questioning what you've learned that you don't have to question, which you can just accept as part of your birthright as a middle-class person. What do you mean I should turn the lights off when I leave the room? But you know, it's not just personal. It's not just somehow my comfort and convenience is more important than how the Earth's biophysical systems work. And of course I should be able to write, and well, the next generation, they're going to be richer than we are anyway. That's certainly what economists teach us. I have to calculate net present values to show you that. But the also thing is that it's systematic. On the microeconomic level, economics is all about efficiency. Although we don't use these simple, if we have Pareto efficiency, where you can't make anybody better off without making anybody else worse off. I have no clue as how anybody would possibly measure that. Or we can have allocative efficiency, where resources flow to the best use. But that can only happen in perfect competition, which is, you know, kind of like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. It's kind of a nice idea, but doesn't exist in the real world. So, but even though microeconomics might be all about efficiency, macroeconomy is all about waste. If we did not have copious amounts of waste, the economy would stagnate to a much greater degree than it is already. I know we're all supposed to have 5 and 6 and 7%, or sometimes financial institutions will demand 40% growth rates, but if you look back to the Civil War, we've grown at less than 2%. Stagnation is the norm. The 60s were the anomaly, but yet that's what we're supposed to assume. So if we produce this stuff, because we get more efficient and because we can throw fossil fuels at production, then we can't sell it, then we stagnate. So I have a friend who's a marketing professor, and he puts it really briefly that what marketing is all about is you sell people a bunch of stuff that they don't need and don't want, and convince them that their life will be terrible if they don't buy it. So next time they'll come back and get it voluntarily without you having to put any money into it. But that's incompatible. A system that has to perpetually grow and have to produce more stuff and have to throw it away and get something that's new and improved. That's incompatible with living within our biophysical limits. But yet, as my friend Julie Shore wrote in her book, Born to Buy, that we are bombarded from the time we are walking with images. And you know, there's boy cartoons and there's girl cartoons, and it's now hard, if you have young children and watch cartoons, to tell the difference between the advertisements and the program. And I know one of my daughter's favorite ones, Rainbow Bright, was so sickeningly sweet that you're almost happening that G.I. Joe comes along and sticks her with the bayonet. But the other thing I've learned, and it comes from teaching in a liberal arts college, that logic and evidence don't motivate everyone. That, you know, my psychologist friend tells me that the Olympic system completely overwhelms the rational system. Yet as an economist, I live in this world of abstract logic and evidence, and how do I reach people and bring them along to maybe just consider that maybe it's not your way of doing everything, but it's worth taking a chance on. I think there's limits from an academic upstream that, I know, I remember when I went into my kids' kindergarten. Anybody remember kindergarten? I mean, what do you see? What do you see? The kids are loud. They're moving around. They're talking to each other. They've got smiles on their faces. They're having fun. And then you walk into a class of high school seniors. Man, what's a class of high school seniors? Are you walking around and playing with physical objects and having fun and talking to each other?
There's remarkably less than that.
There's remarkably, right, you're all of a sudden studying for the test. You're not studying to know anything or apply anything, you just have to take the test. I think they call that no childness. Then there's what I call the scourge of postmodernism, right? That it's more individualistic than the modernism it criticizes, and I think it's led to this ethos of all me, all the time. That somehow my identity is more important than how the Earth system functions. Well, there's a role that social media plays. There's people know about FOMO, fear of missing out. So the idea that you could walk into a class and for an hour and 15 minutes just pay attention seems to be more and more missing. Maybe Marcy's right. Maybe I shouldn't try to do anything for more than 20 minutes without a break. And plus what Julian Shore had written about Born to Buy. So there's a lot of things that are beyond our control in the classroom that students just come in already having inculcated into their, but this has been said. There's declining resource quality, there's climate change. Robert Gordon had written about, you know, the slow growth rates. Paul Baran and Paul Sweezy wrote about, you know, the role of waste in absorbing economic surplus. And plus, one of my favorite economists, John Kenneth Galbraith, really kind of put it down in his great book, The Culture of Contentment, that somehow the economy is built on convenience. Now, of course, most of the world's population is left out of that, but we're supposed to believe that convenience is our birthright. And I know we're supposed to grow, and if you look at things cumulatively, every one of those blue bars is a recession, but it's roughly exponential. And that's what pressures the environment. It's a cumulative amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's the cumulative amount of resources that have been extracted. It's the cumulative amount of waste that builds up. But then if you look at growth from another perspective, from year to year or percentage growth, that's what it looks like. There's a lot of variation, but there's a slight downward trend. Now, this is the one that employment depends upon. So that puts us in a unique dilemma. We're growing too fast to live within nature's limits, and we're growing too slowly to provide employment. So you can't be too fast and too slow at the same time. So this creates a great policy dilemma. So usually what I do is go through all kinds of measures of overshoot. Have people ever seen this before? And then you can go put GDP growth onto it and say, hey, maybe there's a connection between energy use and the economy, or maybe we can look at how much oil we're using, conventional and non-conventional, and we're getting more and more of our energy from, I've seen a biology professor talking, you know that humans are the only species we know that drill down to 10,000 feet to get energy? And it's limited. And then in Nature, a journal which David Packer is familiar with. Back in 2004, Johann Rockstrom and his team that also included Will Steffen and James Hansen came up with a set of planetary boundaries. And those red lines are the ones we've exceeded. Biodiversity loss and disruption of biogeochemical cycles and the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And some of them we're getting closer. Land use change is a nice way of saying deforestation. And some things we really haven't quantified yet, chemical pollution and ocean acidification we're getting out there, and stratospheric ozone depletion. We almost wrecked the planet, but then Paul Crutzen and Sherwin Rowland and Mario Molina figured out what was happening, and we could actually change things. But we could step back from that, because getting rid of chlorinated fluorocarbons' ability to deplete the ozone could happen by a technological change. You could add hydrogen to the mix. Boom. Technology will save. Of course, there is that problem by adding hydrogen makes it another really powerful greenhouse gas. And so there's often unintended consequences of technological change. And there's the Earth's recent climate history. And what I point out, people, is where the period in which humans evolved, the Holocene, is unusual in its stability. That's what we've got, is unusual stability. And then I'm going to show you a couple graphs that I can go through quickly, because I think you've seen them before. The great acceleration of exponential growth and everything. But the question I ask people is, how compatible is this escalating exponential growth with this stability? And how long can we keep doing what we're doing before we disrupt the stability? What that means is just reordering not only your own thought patterns on how much resource use you deserve, but also it means you have to think about what the economy is like. I once asked my students in the 1980s, which would you prefer, global thermonuclear war or socialism in America? How many people? It was about 2 to 1 for global thermonuclear war. So just rethinking the economy in which you live is asking really a lot, and doing it in an era of having less, and having less permanently. I'm really asking people a lot. What I'm really asking is to ask people who may be struggling themselves to cut back in order to give a little bit better life to a child in Africa a couple generations from now. I know I ask a lot of people, but my job is to make people think profound thoughts. And to me, that's about the most profound thought I can think of, is to get people to think not me now, but humanity in the distant future.
1 minute.
So the problem is we live with all these myths. Charlie and I pointed it out in Energy and the Wealth of Nations. I think one of the big myths is prices are determined by supply and demand. Most prices are administered. You know, tuition here isn't determined by supply and demand. The board gets together and sets the price, and you either pay it or you don't. Yep, the vibrant growth is the norm. It's a myth. Or the idea that technology will save us. So clean energy. But, you know, as Charlie said, that each one of those wind turbines takes about 300 kilograms of neodymium. And where does that come from? Well, most of it comes from China. So first you mine the ore, then you devastate the agriculture. Oh yeah, and then you gotta remove the Aurora, basically by using coal, and then you have to put it in a container ship and send it across the Pacific, burning bunker oil, and then you go through the Panama Canal and up the coast and into the St. Lawrence River and down Lake Ontario to Oswego, where you put one blade at a time on a truck and drive it out 100 miles to Fenner, and now we have clean energy. So I'm not of the belief that technology will save us. And, you know, there's hydraulic fracturing. It's already been talked about. And you know, all you gotta do is to figure out how long hydraulic fracturing will last is look at the depletion curves, and it doesn't tell a pretty picture. And you know, there's Bakken, and those are the fundamental dilemmas. Capitalism has to grow. The Earth systems won't retain any more growth. If we don't grow, we stagnate. If we do grow, we risk the either we stop growing voluntarily, or nature's going to tell us we have to stop, both in terms of lack of fuels but I don't know. How do you find a politician that's got the courage to stand up before the electorate and say, I'm going to have a policy, if you vote for me, I'm going to reduce the amount of resources you have access to, and to preserve things for the poor of the world and the next generation. Please vote for me. I don't see that within our system. So, finally, even though we have been pressuring, there's a lot of human needs that are yet met. I mean, people are, as Franklin Roosevelt said, ill-housed, ill-clad, ill-shod, don't have jobs, work for low wages. So the question is, how do we meet human needs while stepping back from the planetary boundaries? Kate Rayworth, who works for Oxfam, said, how do we find the donut? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not completely sure how to do it, but there's a suggestion. When does growth stop making us better off, and when do we enhance our lifestyles by cutting back? Thank you.
Thank you so much.